In his pockets, they found 2 handwritten notes, 30 lines of coded material, letters, numbers, dashes, and parentheses, arranged in a system so consistent and rule-based that the FBI's own cipher unit spent 12 years on them. Thousands of cryptographers, linguists, and code breakers around the world have tried. Nobody has cracked them. The man those notes belonged to was named Ricky McCormick. He was 41 years old. He had no car, no money, and no known reason to be in that field. He also, according to everyone who knew him, could barely write his own name. On June 30th, 1999, a woman driving a rural road near West Alton, Missouri, a flat stretch of land wedged between the Missouri and Mississippi rivers, 20 miles outside St. Louis, saw something in the field and stopped. There was a man lying face down in the dirt. Ricky had been dead for at least 3 days. The summer heat had done its work. The decomposition was so advanced that police couldn't identify him visually. They used his fingerprints. Even those had partially detached. Nobody had reported him missing, not a single person. The medical examiner could not determine a cause of death. No gunshot wound, no visible stab wounds, nothing. The major case squad, St. Louis's elite homicide unit, investigated and officially concluded no evidence of a crime. Ricky McCormick was quietly filed away, a poor, unwell man found dead in a field. Case closed. Except for the notes. 30 lines of code that the FBI sat on for 12 years, never told his family about, never solved, and when they finally went public, his mother found out by watching the evening news. A man who couldn't write, an unbreakable cipher, and a family that says those two things cannot both be true. So who wrote those notes, and what did they cost him? In mid-June 1999, about 2 weeks before his body was found, Ricky McCormick came back from Florida. It wasn't his first trip. He'd made at least 2 that year, both to Orlando, both arranged through his job at an Amoco gas station on Choteau Avenue in St. Louis. His girlfriend Sandra told investigators she knew what the trips were. Ricky was picking up marijuana for his boss, a man named Baha Hamdallah, and bringing it back in packages he sometimes left at the apartment they shared. Ricky had no car. He had no money beyond disability payments. He was 41 years old, chronically ill, a high school dropout who had never held a job for long. But he had access to bus routes and cheap flights, and for someone running that kind of operation, a man like Ricky was useful, low profile, desperate enough to not ask questions. But something changed on that last trip. When he came back from Florida, Sandra said he was different, quieter. She used one word to describe how he seemed: scared. Whatever happened in Florida, Ricky didn't tell anyone what it was. What he did instead was start going to hospitals. June 22nd, he walked into an emergency room complaining of chest pains and shortness of breath. He was turned away. 3 days later, he went to a second hospital, Forest Park, with the same complaints. This time, they admitted him. And then, 3 days after that, a clerk at the Amoco station saw Ricky at the gas station. June 27th. That was the last confirmed sighting. Nobody reported him missing, not Sandra, not the Hamdallahs, not anyone. For 3 days, Ricky McCormick was simply absent from the world, and no one called it in. When his body was finally found on June 30th, it had already been decomposing in summer heat long enough that police had to identify him by fingerprints. The fingertips had partially separated from the skin.
One investigator later suggested the level of decomposition was consistent with a body that had been kept somewhere warm before being moved to the field, a deliberate attempt to destroy evidence of how he actually died. The medical examiner couldn't determine a cause of death, no wound, no poison, nothing identifiable. And there was one more thing about where the body was found. Ricky had no car. He didn't drive. The cornfield near West Alton was 15 miles from his apartment, in a rural area with no public transport. There was no way for him to have gotten there alone. Someone put him there. And West Alton wasn't an arbitrary choice. That stretch of rural land along the river corridor was known to law enforcement as an area associated with drug-related criminal activity. Whoever left Ricky there knew the territory. That detail would matter later.
The major case squad investigated and found, in their words, no evidence of a crime. The case was effectively set aside. And for 12 years, that's where it stayed, until the FBI revealed something that had been in Ricky's pockets the whole time, something his own family had never been told about, something nobody has been able to read since. These are the two notes found in Ricky McCormick's pockets on June 30th, 1999. The FBI's own Cryptanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit, the CRRU, the same unit that works on coded communications from organized crime and terrorism cases, received these notes and spent years on them. They couldn't crack them. The notes contain over 30 lines of coded material, letters, numbers, dashes, parentheses, not scattered randomly, but arranged in repeating patterns. The same groupings appear in both notes. Whatever this system is, it was used consistently, deliberately, across both pages. The CRRU chief, Dan Olson, was clear. The characters are not random. This means something. We look at a lot of things that are gibberish, arbitrary strikes on a keyboard. This is not that case. The CRRU concluded the notes were written up to 3 days before Ricky's death, possibly the last thing committed to paper before he vanished. In 2011, 12 years after Ricky's body was found, the FBI did something unusual. They publicly released the notes and asked the world for help. They put them on the FBI website. They held a press conference. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of submissions from cryptographers, puzzle solvers, linguists, and amateur code breakers across the world. None of them cracked it. The American Cryptogram Association tried. Professional cryptanalysts tried. It remains, to this day, one of the CRRU's top unsolved ciphers. St. Louis cryptographer Ilanka Dunin, who has spent years studying the world's most famous unbroken codes, reviewed the notes and said something that reframes the entire case. "I don't think McCormick wrote these notes. Perhaps he was a courier." A courier, not the author, a carrier. That single sentence connects directly to something the FBI has never fully explained. The FBI held on to these notes for 12 years before showing them to the public. 12 years. And when they finally did, Ricky's own family found out by watching the local evening news. His mother, Frankie Sparks, didn't just say she was surprised. She said the police had initially told her the only thing in Ricky's pocket was an emergency room ticket. So, either the notes were missed in the original search of the body, or someone, at some point, changed what they told the family about what was found. Here is the central problem with this case, and the actual central problem, not the cipher. The FBI's position is that Ricky McCormick wrote those notes himself. They believe he had been using this personal cipher system since childhood, and that the notes may have been some kind of personal record, a to-do list, a diary entry, something of that nature. Olson himself said, "Even if we found out he was writing a grocery list or a love letter, we would still want to see how the code is solved." That is the official position. Now, here is what Ricky's family said in 2012, a year after the notes went public, after they had time to respond properly. They said they never told investigators that Ricky wrote in code. What they actually told police was that he sometimes jotted down nonsense that he called writing, scribbles, marks, not a system, not a cipher, not something with repeating patterns and internal logic. The only thing he could write was his name. He didn't write in no code, said Frankie Sparks, his mother. He couldn't spell anything, just scribble, said Charles, his cousin. There is documented evidence from his own public defender that Ricky had possible cognitive impairments. He was a high school dropout who moved from grade to grade without genuinely learning to read or write. Some accounts suggest he couldn't reliably spell his own name. So let's hold both of these things at the same time. On one side, the FBI, whose elite cipher unit spent 12 years on these notes and concluded they are the product of a rule-based, consistent, long-practiced system of encryption. On the other, the family of the man those notes supposedly belonged to, who say the idea of him producing anything like this is simply not possible. Both cannot be true, which means one of three things happened. 1. Ricky McCormick was far more cognitively capable than anyone in his life understood, a functionally illiterate man who somehow developed and maintained an unbreakable personal cipher that has defeated the FBI for 25 years. 2. Someone else wrote those notes, and Ricky was carrying them for a reason connected to his work for the handwritten, the drug courier theory that St. Louis cryptographer Ilonka Dunin raised after reviewing the notes. 3. The notes are not a cipher at all. They are the symbolic scribblings of a man with cognitive and mental health struggles, and the FBI has been chasing meaning in something that has none. This is the theory the family leans toward, and it would mean the only real clue in this case has been a dead end from the beginning. The FBI has never formally eliminated any of these possibilities. The CRU still lists this as one of their top unsolved cases. And the investigation into who killed Ricky McCormick, if anyone did, has effectively gone nowhere. But the suspects exist, and they're worth naming. By December 1999, 6 months after Ricky's body was found, something changed. St. Louis Metro Police made contact with St. Charles County, the jurisdiction where the body was discovered, and called a meeting. 9 investigators gathered: homicide detectives, narcotics officers, HUD investigators, and an FBI agent. They were there to talk about 2 names. The first was Baha Hamdallah, Ricky's boss at the Amoco station, the man Ricky's girlfriend believed was using him to move marijuana from Florida. 2 months after Ricky's death, Hamdallah had allegedly been shot by his own brother. He survived and declined to press charges, but the investigation into that shooting cracked open who Hamdallah actually was. Police records described ties to gang members and drug networks across St. Louis. He had allegedly shot a man in 1997 and walked free. He was, in every documented sense, a man with a habit of violence and a habit of avoiding consequences. Then, in October 2000, 16 months after Ricky died, Baha Hamdallah shot a man named Robert Steptoe during an argument at a grocery store in Madison, Illinois. Steptoe died. Hamdallah was convicted of first-degree murder in 2002 and sentenced to 40 years in prison. He is there now, convicted of killing someone else, never charged for Ricky. The second name was Gregory Lamar Knox, a major drug dealer who operated out of the same apartment complex where Ricky lived. Knox was, according to police, a suspect in at least 2 separate murder-for-hire schemes. A confidential informant told investigators something specific, that Knox had been responsible for the killing of a black man who worked at a gas station on Choteau Avenue, the same street as Ricky's Amoco, whose body had been dumped near West Alton. Near West Alton, the same field. Police also uncovered evidence that Knox and the Hamdallahs were connected, working together. Knox was arrested in July 2000 on federal drug trafficking charges. He pled guilty, sentenced to federal prison. Two men, both suspected of murder, both connected to Ricky through his job, his neighborhood, his last known movements. Both now in prison for other crimes, while the investigation into Ricky McCormick's death produced no charges, no trial, and no answer. The surveillance operation built nothing prosecutable, and once both men were off the streets, the momentum behind the case collapsed entirely. Nobody was left to push it. Nobody was left to ask what happened to Ricky. So here is where things stand. A man turns up dead in a field. He has no car. He has no reason to be there. Nobody reported him missing. The cause of death was never established. His employer was a convicted murderer. His neighbor was a suspect in multiple homicides, including one that matches the circumstances of Ricky's death almost exactly. And the only direct evidence, the two notes, is caught in an impossible contradiction. Either they were written by a man who couldn't write, or they were written by someone else entirely. Either they contain information that could solve the case, or they're the scribblings of a man in distress, and the FBI has been chasing a ghost for 25 years. In 2011, when the FBI went public, CRRU Chief Dan Olson said something that has stuck with investigators and researchers ever since. Breaking the code could reveal the victim's whereabouts before his death and could lead to the solution of a homicide. He believed the notes were a map to the truth. But what if the family is right? What if there is no map? What if Ricky McCormick was just a scared man, caught between dangerous people, carrying someone else's secrets in his pocket, and we've been staring at the wrong thing this entire time? The notes remain unbroken. The case remains officially open. The notes are still there. Ricky McCormick isn't.